Shri ma'am to present the paper.
Happy evening. Animals and society, animal tropes in literature. At the core of animal studies, the question, what is an animal, lingers unresolved, and so is it the question, what is a human? And what is it like to be a bat? Philosopher Thomas Nagel argues that human language is not equipped to comprehend the subjectivity of a bat or any other non-human animal. Basically, the human's limitations. Thomas Nagel puts it thus: I want to know what it is like for a bat to be a bat. Yet, if I try to imagine this, I am restricted to the resources of my own mind, and those resources are inadequate to the task. I have neither sonar senses nor wings that the bat has. Here, Nagel places the onus on the human's inherent limits rather than on the bat's inability to understand the human language. Thus, he concludes that consciousness may not be merely a human characteristic. The animal, therefore I am, Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida, a French philosopher, while discussing the difference between himself and an animal, quotes Michel de Montaigne: how does a man know? By his intelligence, the secret animal in internal stirrings of animals. By what comparison between them and us does he infer the stupidity that he attributes to them? When I play with my cat, who knows if I am not a pastime to her more than she is to me? We entertain each other with reciprocal monkey tricks. If I have my time to begin or to refuse, so has she hers. Animal studies is an attempt to answer the question of how can humans rethink and reconfigure their relationships with other animals. Animal studies is an interdisciplinary field that interlinks humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences to study how human and non-human animals relate to each other, their ethical implications, and their socio-political, in essence, animal liberation, exploitation, animality, interspecies relationships, and ecological effects on the environment. Animal studies and approaches. In The Emergence of Animal Studies, written by Martin Danahy and Deborah D. Morse, they define 4 approaches to animal studies, the first of which is animality studies, which studies animals in cultural history without invoking advocacy. In contrast to animality studies, we have critical animal studies, which studies the position of animals with an explicit political agenda. Companion animal studies, as the name suggests, focuses on human relationships with domesticated animals. Zoo criticism involves eco-critical studies, a concern for the global environment and the need for environmental justice. History and animal studies. Animals abound in literature across all ages and cultures, but only rarely have they been the focal point of systematic literary study. Animals have always been popular characters in folk and fairy tales central to indigenous societies, reflecting the close relationship humans share with them. They have long been an integral part of our daily lives, still are today, and undoubtedly will be in the future. Time and again, animals have crossed over into the realm of human history. Just like the rats have become connected inseparably with plague as the root cause of the disease, the bats are connected to coronavirus that might have mutated originally in bats, then might have moved on to humans. It reminds us that animal infections can become human infections because humans are animals. Animals and the relationships humans have with them have a long history and forces in shaping history. History matters to animals as much as animals matter to history. Real and literary animals. Literary animals are created by words. The literary animals in the world of literature clearly differ from the real animals in the real world. Literary wolves cannot bite, and in turn, readers cannot kill them. Literature has the power to construct its own worlds with its own rules. The literary animals can talk. They can even shapeshift. None of these seem to exist in the real world. The categorical distinction between real animals and literary animals constitute the basis of the traditional focus on specific animal genres like fables, animal epics, animal tales, and animal motifs. There may be a distinction between literary and real animals. The field of literary animal studies proves that this distinction is by no means self-evident, trivial, natural, or easy. Real animals play a role in the creation of every literary animal equivalent, a process requiring serious scholarly attention to details, traces of which are reflected in their literary counterparts. The emphasis is first on the represented real animal being portrayed by literary animal, then on how literature represents that animal, and finally on how the literary animal mimics the represented real animal. And it's not just limited to these approaches, this emphasis. The entire process demands a detailed knowledge of animals. Literary elephants belong to memories, wolves to packs, giraffes to towers, and so on. Literature seeks to establish animals as a subject worthy of consideration, model not only on the human likeness of animals, but also on the common life that they can affect, influence, and change like all the other objects in cross-species communities. Animals and injustice in literature. The Faithful Hound. This is a story about a general who has, a high-ranking person who has a pet and a baby. The baby is left in the care of a parent who negligently leaves the child alone. A dangerous animal appears and threatens the baby. The pet heroically defends the baby. The dangerous animal is killed by the heroic pet. The jubilant pet greets his master or the mistress. A hasty, injudicious judgment is made on the spot. The pet is killed. The baby is found safe and sound. The body of a dangerous animal is found. The parent suffer remorse, sorrow, and grief because of their hasty decision. There is a sense of disappointment, the hasty decision by the high-ranking person. Reconfiguring wolf myths. Never Cry Wolf. This is a book written by Farley Mowat. It's a memoir based on the author's experience on observing wolves in subarctic Canada. It played a significant role in altering Canadian public opinion in favor of the wolves during the 1960s. Mowat simply implants one narrative of wolves onto other. The text dismantles the mythical perception of wolves as dangerous, bloodthirsty hunters who are decimating caribou, reindeer populations by instilling a sentimental depiction of wolves as gentle, anthropomorphic family units. Mowat discovers that rather than being common wanton killers of caribou, the wolves subsist quite heavily on small mammals such as rodents and hares, even choosing them over reindeer when available. He concludes, we have doomed the wolf not for what it is, but for what we deliberately and mistakenly perceive it to be. The mythologized epitome of a savage, ruthless killer, which is in reality not more than the reflected image of ourselves. We have made it the scapegoat for our own sins. He states the main reason for declining population of reindeer is human hunters from civilization. It's the human hunters from civilization and it's not the wolves. Social Rabbits. Watership Down. This Watership Down book was written by Richard Adams in the year 1972. It's set in England's Downs. This tale of adventure follows a small group of rabbits. Although they live in their natural wild environment with burrows, they are anthropomorphized, possessing their own culture, language, proverbs, poetry, and mythology. They escape the destruction of their home from the intrusion of man and seek a place to establish a new home. They journey forth from their native Sandalford Warren through the harrowing trials posed by predators and adversaries to a mysterious promised land and a more perfect society. Violent World of Animals and Humans. White Fang. This was written by Jack London in the year 1906. This story details the journey of White Fang, a wild wolf dog whose struggle for survival and eventual domestication comprised the novel's plot in Yukon Territory and the Northwest Territories during the 1890s Klondike Gold Rush, that is the migration. White Fang is written from the viewpoint of the canine character, enabling people to explore how animals view their world and how they view humans, examining the violent world of wild animals and equally violent world of humans. The book also explores complex themes including animal cruelty, survival, morality, and redemption. A motive in this novel is nature versus nurture. Nurture, he talks about observational behavior, and nature is mainly about genetics. Animal Farm, we might all have read this novel, Animal Farm, at George Orwell. Animal Farm is a beast fable, reflects the events leading up to the Russian evolution of 1917 and then into the Stalinist era of the Soviet Union. It tells the story of a group of anthropomorphic farm animals that rebel against the tyranny of human beings, the human farmer, hoping to create a society where the animals can be equal, free, and happy. Ultimately, the rebellion is betrayed, and under the dictatorship of a pig named Napoleon, the farm ends up in a state as bad as it was before. Orwell's novel stages the animal rebellion in an English farm. The animals correctly assert that the work they perform only benefits humans. In the words of the main character, man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk. He does not lay eggs. He is too weak to pull the plough. He cannot run fast enough to catch rabbits, yet he is lord of all the animals. Alice Adventures in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. John Tenniel then created illustrations for the story conceived by Lewis Carroll that further affect the reader's view of Carroll's use of animals. This talks about animals challenging human superiority. Alice and the Dodo. The most striking part of the illustration is the anthropomorphism of the bird. He has human hands coming out from underneath his wings, one of which is holding a cane. And canes generally represent wisdom, as those who use them are often elderly and thus stereotypically wise and respected. Tenniel, by giving Dodo the cane, implies that the Dodo is an elder of both the animals and Alice. Alice and the Pig Baby. The pig, which had been an actual child, but soon after the Duchess flung the baby at Alice, it turns into a pig. The illustration depicts the post-metamorphosis pig in Alice's arms, just as a baby would have, and in the same position as a baby would be held in. This brings forth a question: if it is unacceptable for a child to be treated in an abusive manner, then why is the same treatment meted out for the creature of the same intelligence? Wild Animals and Human Proximity. Epiornis Island, written by H.G. Wells. A shipwrecked sailor raises a prehistoric elephant bird hatched from a long dormant egg as his only companion. The giant ratite, 14 feet tall as an adult, eventually turns aggressive following a skirmish over limited food, and the sailor is forced to kill the bird to protect himself. His regret is profound, however, and overall the impression is one of tragedy, illustrating what happens when wild animals are forced to live in close proximity to humans. This is again by H.G. Wells, Humans as Fodder. The War of the Worlds. His protagonist says of the invading Martians' consumption of human blood that the bare idea of this is no doubt horribly repulsive to us, but at the same time, I think that we should remember how repulsive our carnivorous habits would seem to an intelligent rabbit. Humans as Fodder, again the Time Machine by H.G. Wells. The time traveler observes the underworlders eating a strange meat which he cannot at first identify. He later comes to the horrific realization that the Morlocks raise the Eloi like cattle and then use them as a food supply. Both the underworlders and the Eloi are two branches, and these two branches evolved from humans. Literature and Animal Studies. This was written by Mario Ortiz Robles. In this book, the author tracks the presence of animals across an expansive literary archive to argue that literature cannot be understood as a human endeavor apart from its capacity to represent animals. This book is about the relationship between literature, one of the oldest of human endeavors, and animal studies, one of the newest disciplines within the humanities. The book seeks to find a common ground between two very different approaches to the same or sets of questions pertaining to how humanity defines itself and to whether or not this definition has something to do with the animal world. The book allows us to realize the lives of non-human animals, that literature can make a lasting contribution to animal studies, that there is something fictional about our relation to animals. The author provides insightful analysis of selected example poems on songbirds, beginning with samples from standard romantic poets Clare, Coleridge, Keats, Shelley, but also ranging into work by modernist and contemporary writers. In Songbirds, the editor establishes that the nightingale's song inspires love, sorrow, and pity in those who listen to it, whether in the remembered form of a poem or by remembering its song from the presence of its mossy nest, while also documenting poems about other birds of song. In sonnet number 102, Shakespeare uses Philomel to depict a lover's reticence in expressing his love. In Shakespeare's sonnet 102, the association between the Philomel, nightingale, and poetic creation passes through love, for the bird's song and the poet's sonnet are both directed at love. Mary de Francis' Lost Stick depicts a lover's sorrow. A story of a mediation where two lovers live side by side in adjoining castles, where he is an unmarried knight, she is married to his friend and neighbor. They communicate with each other through facing windows but cannot ever be together because the lady's husband closely guards her. The lady gets up at night to talk with her lover across the open windows, but she gets up so often that her husband begins to get upset and questions her about what she does at night. Her reply, "My lord," the lady answered him, "there is no joy in this world like hearing the nightingale sing. That's why I stand there. It sounds so sweet at night that it gives me great pleasure. It delights me so, and I so desire it, I cannot close my eyes." The Pied Piper of Hamelin. We might all have studied this when we were in our school. This was written by Robert Browning. Very few texts have granted rats anything resembling subjectivity. The poem aptly captures the abject character of a representation of rats. Rats, they fought the dogs and killed the cats and bit the babies in the cradles and ate the cheese out of the vats and licked the soup from the cook's own ladles, split open the kegs of salted sprats, made nests inside men's Sunday hats, and even spoiled the women's chats by drowning their speaking with shrieking and squeaking in 50 different sharps and flats. The Oxford Handbook of Animal Studies, written by Linda Caloff. This book introduces animal studies as an interdisciplinary endeavor to understand the relationship humans have with other animals, mapped into 5 major categories reflected in the titles of each of the 5 parts: animals in the landscape of law, politics, and public policy, animal intentionality, agency, and reflexive thinking. Reflexive thinking is from one's own experiences. Animals as objects in science, food, spectacle, and sport. Animals in cultural representations. Animals in ecosystem. Handbook of Historical Animal Studies, edited by Andre Kreber, Mike Roscher, and Brett Michel. One of the first comprehensive books to provide systematic evolution and introduction to the history of the interrelations of humans and animals and their historical study. Animals are inseparably intertwined with history, from the earliest traces of human societies through the present. Non-human animals have left their mark on human culture, civilizations, and shaped our own history. But they also have histories of their own. This book assesses these histories and their writing along the lines of historiographic fields such as social or political history, historical approaches such as feminist or post-colonial history, and contrary topics in the history of human-animal interaction such as the history of pet keeping, hunting, exhibiting animals in zoos, museums, or circuses, regional perspectives such as that of African or American literature, and provides proposals for new animal-conscious historical timelines such as pre- and post-domestication. Literature and animals, the problem continuum. The clarity on the relationship between literature, animal ethics, animal protection, the interdisciplinary collaboration with the scientific disciplines of ethology, animal ecology, and evolutionary biology in terms of socio-political methodology has not been reached yet. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Sai Shri ma'am, for your valuable presentation. Next, I would request Nisha Daphne ma'am to present the paper.
Good evening, all. Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, dear Ms. Shalini, for your for introducing me. Now I will share my screen. Is it visible, ma'am?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. So my topic for today's symposium is the language of the wild, intersections of literature and the animal world. In the beginning, prior to written languages, ancient people narrated animal stories by drawing symbolic visual narratives on the walls of their cave homes. For the ancient Egyptians and Greeks, animals such as bulls and lions, as well as hybrid creatures like the griffin and sphinx, played important roles in the development of complex mythological systems. The Judeo Christian tradition introduced other symbolic animal figures into literature, and stories in both Old and New Testaments of the Bible have provided vivid and lasting images of animals that represent various human and godly attributes, including snake, the swine, and the lamb. They were the heroes and villains. They were introduced as winners and losers, good and evil. Perhaps it was because people were closer to nature back then and living lives that were more connected to animals compared to how we live today. Um, Having grown up reading Panchatantras and Aesop fables, many of us were surrounded by stories featuring animals. While children tend to gravitate towards animal stories, we adults also stand to learn a lot through these fictional animals. These animals might have imparted wisdom through their tales or brought out animal cruelty in their stories and sometimes even carried out adventures on their own. There is no denying that these animals have carved out a special place in our hearts and minds. From the mighty Aslan in Narnia to the loyal Hedwig in Harry Potter, and from the hardworking boxer in Animal Farm to everyone's favorite Winnie the Pooh. So, as we are talking about animals and stories in literature, animals, as shown in the cartoons or animated films, stories are often anthropomorphized to make them more relatable to people by wearing clothes and walking on their hind legs, but still shown as they follow their species' eating habits and living conditions. This is evident that animal characters are also used in ways that human characters are not. Readers demand reality from animals. This is because an animal is relatively unknowable. Even though the science has an exponential growth, I think we can identify if science takes more what to say can identify how they can think and feel their inner selves. It will always be a mystery, and readers take that into consideration also. Um so now talking about traditional approaches to human animal relationships, in literary history, according to Aristotle, there is a natural hierarchy of living beings. The different levels are determined by the abilities present in the beings due to their nature. Aristotle says while plants, animals, and human beings are capable of taking in nutrition and growing, only animals and human beings are capable of conscious experience, the perspectives. This means that plants being inferior to animals and human beings, and they have the function of serving the needs of animals and human beings. But likewise, human beings are superior to animals because human beings have the capacity for using reason to guide their conduct, while animals lack their ability and must instead rely on instinct.
Nisha,
So,
if I don't mind, Nisha,
yes, ma'am.
your I can see your first slide. Do you mean to scroll up a bit, or you'll come to that later?
No, ma'am, actually, I can see it here. Yeah, I
Okay.
will. Yes, ma'am, I
No,
will share it.
I just wanted to know if you're synchronizing with your slides.
Isn't it showing, ma'am?
It's showing, but I can see only your first slide.
Oh, I'm sorry, ma'am. Just a minute, ma'am.
If you have your content has gone beyond first slide, could you share?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Is it okay, ma'am?
Yeah, if you can first go, yeah, scroll down, no, your slides.
This one, ma'am, in the beginning.
Yeah, that only that we saw. Beyond that, we didn't see.
Should I start from the beginning or what?
No, no, no. Just show us the slides that we missed.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, ma'am. So, animals and stories in literature. This is what I spoke about. Is this okay, ma'am? Can you view this?
Yes, yes. Go to the next and the
Yeah.
next.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, traditional approaches. So Aristotle says that human beings are superior to animals because human beings have the capacity for using reason to guide their conduct, while animals lack this ability and must instead rely on instinct. Next, Rene Descartes. He says that animals are machines without the capacity to feel pain, sorrow, or suffering. The statement objectifies that since animals are inferior, they can't be bridged with humans. Next comes author Schopenhauer, and he was a German philosopher who was an early defender of animal rights. He believed that animals lack both anxiety and hope because its consciousness is restricted to the present moment. And then comes Friedrich Nietzsche, who believed that animals live more fully in the present moment because they lack memories of the past and no hope of future. To talk from the anthropological difference to anthropocentric and anthropomorphized view between animals and humans, um, we all know the basic differences here. So we can say humans have reason, they have language, they can use their hands and legs, while animals don't. They don't have
Excuse
reason.
me, Nisha. I think it's not none of your slides. We can only see the first one, or maybe I am the only one seeing the
Ma'am,
first.
ma'am, if
I'm seeing
so,
only the
Nancy,
first one, the language of the wild.
Yeah,
That's
I'm
all I'm
also
seeing.
seeing only the first one.
no, why?
Even I'm seeing only the first one. It's not moving.
Miss Nisha, I think you need to share the PowerPoint window. I think the slide, I mean, where you're opening the slideshow window, you need to share that.
1 second, ma'am. Nancy, ma'am, is there?
Yes, send it to her. She
Yeah,
will do it.
I have sent her the slides. Ma'am, can you please help me out there?
Please scroll down, Nancy, so that we can see the slides we missed.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, next. Okay, what's the slide about?
Yes, ma'am. This slide is about that seconds. Is it this? Do you want me to explain slide 2, ma'am?
Yes, yes, second slide, second slide.
Okay, ma'am. I'll
In the
begin.
beginning.
Yeah. In the beginning, actually, prior to written languages, ancient people narrated animal stories by drawing symbolic visual narratives on the walls of their cave homes. For the ancient Egyptians and Greeks, animals such as bulls and lions, as well as the hybrid creatures like griffin and sphinx, they played an important role in development of complex mythological systems. And in Judeo-Christian tradition, they introduced some mythological figures into literature. So, in Old and New Testament, also in the Bible, they have provided vivid and lasting images of animals that represent various human and godly attributes, like including snake, swines, or the lamb. Uh,
Okay.
they were played as heroes or villains, or winners or losers, or evil and good, everything. And so, what happens? Perhaps it was because people were very much closer to nature, and back then they were living lives that were more connected to animals compared to how we live today. So, this is the actual content, ma'am, from the slide. Nancy, ma'am, slide
Next,
3, please.
next,
Slide
next
3.
one.
So here I have given some about animals and stories. Actually, we would have all grown up reading Panchatantra or Aesop fables, and many of us were surrounded by these stories featuring animals. While children they tend to gravitate towards animal stories, we adults also stand to learn a lot through these fictional animals. Even if it is Aslan from Narnia or Loyal Hedwig in Harry Potter, or the boxer from Animal Farm, the horse. Everyone's favorite is the Winnie the Pooh. Ma'am, next slide, please. And seeing this 4 pictures, we can relate this because animals shown here in the cartoons or animated films, stories are often anthropomorphized to make them more relatable to people by wearing clothes and walking on their hind legs, but still shown as they follow their species, eating habits, and living conditions. This is evident that animal characters are also used in ways that human characters are not. Readers demand less reality from animals. So, this is because an animal is relatively unknowable. Even though science has developed a lot, I personally think that we have to identify how animals they think and feel their inner selves, and it will always be a mystery if it is not been identified. Next slide, ma'am. Okay. So, talking about traditional approaches by the literary stalwart critics like Aristotle, Rene Descartes, and the other 2 critics, I will start from Aristotle. In his text, The Generation of Animals, he says about a natural hierarchy of animal living beings. So, he says that there are different levels that are determined by the abilities present in the beings due to their nature. So he compares plants, animals, and human beings. He says that all are capable of taking nutrition and growing, but animals and human beings are capable of conscious experience. This means that plants being inferior to animals and human beings, they have the function of serving the needs of animals and human beings. So plant is very much inferior. So likewise, human beings are superior to animals because human beings have the capacity for using reason to guide their conduct, while animals lack this ability and must instead rely on instinct. So, to conclude about Aristotle's view, the function of animals is to serve the needs of human beings. Next, talking about Rene Descartes in his Animal Machine, he says that uh, animals are machines without the capacity to feel pain or sorrow or suffering. This statement objectifies that since animals are inferior, they can't be bridged with humans. So the next author, Schofana, he was a German philosopher. He was also a defender of animal rights. He believed that animals lack both anxiety and hope because its consciousness is restricted to the present moment. And finally, Frederick Nietzsche, he believed that animals live more fully in present moment, and because they lack memories of the past and no hope of future. Next slide, ma'am. Yeah. So in this slide, we will have a what to say, a difference between anthropological, anthropocentric, and anthropomorphism. So as we see on the slide, the basic differences have been shown between animals and humans. So we can say humans have reason, language. We use hands and legs. When we talk about animals, we say that animals lack reason, lack language. They use forehands or hind legs that tell us, etc. Humans, we are aware of the past, present, and future, but animals, they are aware only of present. When a human being dies, we call it as a body or a dead body. But when animals die, we say that animals perish, and even we call an animal's body as flesh. So here, animals are what to say? We treat them as object, and humans as subject. So here, the main difference between anthropological difference here we see is that humans are not equal to animals, but humans are greater than animals. So it's all about humans. So when we talk about anthropocentric worldview, we say humans are equal to subject and consider animals as object. So the misuse, exploitation of humans on animals is justified. When we talk about anthropomorphized view of animals in literature, they are shown via visual arts and various other cultural and religious practices. So from the slide, I would like to say that the consequences of these differences lead to view that animals are rendered as invisible, ignored, and overlooked. Next slide, ma'am. Okay, so how are animals portrayed in literary text? In literature, animals are almost represented as metaphors, symbols, or other representations of human beings without any attention being paid to actual animal as living beings in the real world where we inhabit. In the real world, animals are overloaded with multiple interpretations. For example, if we take a real dog, we interpret by calling a dog lover calls it by names with so much of adoration. Uh, he calls it loyal, a best friend, childlike, a guard, therapeutic, etc. On the other hand, the same dog is described to be something to be aggressive, dangerous, a menace, and even carriers of diseases. But in a literary text, the author represents the animals as carriers of certain literary meaning, and with interesting kind of writing with falsification, the literary animals get a shape by the authors or by the readers when we have a prejudice with our own likes and dislikes, as well as our own level of knowledge of the same animal in the real world. As the presenter said, um, Sai ma'am, she said that as literary animals made out of words, they seem to differ clearly from real animals in the real world. She said, literary wolves cannot bite us, and in turn, we readers cannot kill them. That's a very, very valid point, because that shows a categorical distinction between real animals on one hand and the literary animals on the other hand. So none of these seem to exist in the real world, whatever they have shown. And so this is a question that should be intentionally asked, uh, which has been taken into granted for many years. Ma'am, can you move to the next slide, please? Yes, animal studies. So animal studies is a recently recognized field which emerges to understand both human-animal relations now and in the past. And this animal studies, it shows the ways in which the non-human animals' lives interact with human societies, that is, intersections with multi-species ecology, multi-species geography, multi-species mobility, and it studies along with the environmental studies too. Therefore, animal studies attempts to make visible what was once invisible into visible through scholarly inquiry. Next slide, ma'am. Yes. So, categories of animals. Uh, Animal studies actually attempts to deconstruct the cultural construct that we have constructed. As you see the slide, such as domesticated animals or wild animals, pet animals or companion animals, working animals or useful animals, milch animals or vermin animals. Actually, animals don't exist in these categories at all. Ma'am, next slide. Okay. So how can we read animals ethically in literary text? I took a reference from Professor Roland Bogetz, who founded the research network Cultural and Literary Animal Studies back in 2011. He says that animals in literary text can be exposed in three steps. One is by contextualizing. That is, when an animal is portrayed in a literary context, it can be properly appreciated and interpreted. It could be hunting, it can be a dressage, it can be its behavior, the places, or anything that depends on the text that we are reading. The second thing he says is historizing. Historizing, he says that it's by determining the place of the animal in the literary text and what influenced the author to write about that particular animal in his or her text. And the third step he says is poeticizing. Poeticizing is, he says that all animals can be poeticized. It's not just bringing about certain quality of animals or animal knowledge or animal practicing or poeticizing alone the cliche type of animals. So instead of just describing animals in anthropocentric approach to literary text, we need to focus on animals with their typical capabilities and limitations. Next slide, ma'am. Yes. Uh, so, uh, Continuing with this, we can ask ourselves how to identify the importance of animals in a literary text. The first question would be like, what type of representation is made out of this literary animal in the text that we are reading? Is it naturalistic? Does the animal appear as a living being as it would be in the real world? Or is the animal used only for the allegory or a metaphor or for something human? So the second question can be like this: how does the animal articulate itself in the text? Is it endowed with human language? Is it able to express its animality using human language? Which form of body language or non-verbal expression or behavior is portrayed in the text? Is it able to express its animality using human language? And is there any inclusion of animal perspective? Is there any attempt to deconstruct the human gaze? What kind of human relationship is reflected in the text? Is there any respect shown for the animal? And the last question can be like this: does the text really educate about the animal? Next slide, ma'am. So, the key ways to infer how the animals are portrayed in literary text, I think we can, if we take a text and if we are going to infer about animals, these three approaches can be done. First one is close reading of the text instead of traditional anthropocentric approach. A post-structural approach can be done by reading without considering what the author might have intended or what the author would have liked the reader to make the text interesting to use the animal. And the conventional reading, like telling moral of the story or reflections of human animal relationship in the text. Last slide, ma'am. So to conclude, we should see through the animals instead of just seeing the animals. We should reconnect more with the world of animals, not just by passive reflections, but with a social reality. And by doing so, we can understand and intersect the language of the animal world in literature. Thank you, ma'am. With this, I conclude. Sorry for the interruptions, ma'am.
Thank you, Nisha Daphne, ma'am, for your knowledgeable presentation. And also thank our special thanks to our Secretary of the Club, Nancy, ma'am, to stand beside Nisha, ma'am. We are sharing the screen and presenting the slides. Thanks for that, ma'am. And this is the time to receive the keynotes. So now I would request Dr. Saranya, ma'am, to deliver the keynotes.
Thank you, Shalini. Very good evening to all of you. Quite a good crowd, I would say. Around 30 people are here for a Friday evening. I would say that's a great crowd. First of all, I would like to congratulate both the speakers who spoke, Ms. Sai Shri and Ms. Daphne. I think whatever points I had prepared, I think most of the points were reflected in the presentations that you had made. I did prepare a PowerPoint presentation, but I'm not very sure if I have to share it because I think most of the points would probably be redundant. Just to start with a few points on the feedback to the presentation, then I will move on to whatever I wanted to speak about literature and animal studies. With regard to the first presentation, I think the presenter had a lot to say, but what I felt was she could have paused on all the works that she had discussed. I felt that she could have maybe taken time to really look into how these texts dealt with the animal characters or how it approached all those theoretical standpoints on animal studies. It was more like it was a very good introductory presentation, I would say, because it did bring out some of the key works, both fiction and non-fiction and theoretical works on animal studies info, to the audience, introduced it to the audience. With regard to the second presentation, it was quite a good presentation with a lot of inputs on very beginning, right from the biblical stories, right from the mythological stories about the animals, and moved on to I think it had a very coherent. She traced the history of representation of animals in literature and moved on to the current contemporary debates and discussion on animal studies. So it was a very good presentation. So I would like to congratulate both of them. So what have I got to say about animal studies and literature and animal studies? A relatively nascent field compared to all that we study, in our undergraduate or postgraduate days. So what prompted people to speak about animals? First of all, the term animal comes from the Latin word animus, anything that breathes. Animus, anima meaning breathing. Anything that breathes it belongs to the category of anima. So we are also animals. So we call our animals in their term as non-human animals and human animals. People mentioned about both speakers mentioned about Aristotle. Aristotle called us the political animal. So we are political animal because we are thinking. We are called as political animals by Aristotle. So we are also animals, but we are human animal and they are non-human animal, because animal studies exponents insist that we distinguish this, because when we say animal, the moment we say animal, somebody mentioned about animality. So there is a speciesist tendency to look down upon the term animal. So in order to keep away the bias, most of the animal studies practitioners say that we need to have new terminologies in place in order to let go of this bias. So we are human animals and they are non-human animals. So where does the story of literature and human studies, or where does this animal studies, what is the basis of this animal studies bring from? So people, as was evident from both the presentations, you would all refer to a lot of philosophers and thinkers who had spoken a lot about animals, right from Descartes, Schopenhauer, and Aristotle, and many other philosophers who have given animals good thought. And animals are as old as this earth. probably older than human species. Most of the animals that we have with us today are probably older than us species wise, and they've always traveled with us. But because of, as I think Miss Daphne mentioned, because of our thinking capacity, or us being conscious beings, somehow we have developed this hierarchy. We have established a hierarchy in place which looks at animals. And one thing about hierarchy is that how man-made the whole thing is. Nature never said that lion is the king of the forest, or nature never said this is the ruler and this comes at the top. A lion just likes a deer, that's all. That doesn't make it the king of the forest. It's just that the idea of looking at everything not as a rhizomic structure but as a hierarchical structure is so embedded in human psyche. So we look at a hierarchical structure everywhere. So we see that structure. So this hierarchical structure is what led to rise of all those critical studies that we are familiar with today. Take it, be it races, studies in racism, be it post-colonial studies, be it literature and environment. Any type of critical studies tries to engage with this. So the key, engage with this form of hierarchical oppression, domination, or oppression or domination based on hierarchy. So animal studies also spring from there. So we could say many of the practitioners of animal studies today say they were all inspired by eco-criticism or post-colonial studies. So because the root comes from there. So, or feminism. Now, what do all these studies have in common? They look at a structure which is oppressive for one part of the species or one species. So Peter Singer, a philosopher and an animal activist, so he came out with this book called Animal Liberation in 1976, if I'm not mistaken. So this was a key turning point in studies on animal and non-human animal beings. So we could say this was like a turning point in any study that is related to animality and animal studies, because he was the first person to speak about the way in which animals have been treated, the way in which animals have been looked upon by human beings throughout human history. And this is reflected in all other studies related to culture and with history. As far as humanities is concerned, we animals have always been part of literature, as Ms. Daphne rightly pointed out, even from our drawings, early human drawings, from our literature, from our mythology, Ovid's Metamorphoses, all the biblical stories, Aesop's fables, Panchatantra fables. The oldest paintings that we have is of a bull in the ancient Hindu Indus Valley civilization. The bull that is painted is one of the ancient symbols that we have. So it shows the sort of journey that animals and non-human animals, human animals and non-human animals have traveled together. But I'm not very sure. You mentioned about a point that they lived in harmony with animals. I am not very sure about that really, because man-animal conflict has always been a part of our historical studies. So I'm not very sure if we ever lived in peace or lived in harmony with animals. We made use of them. We made use of animals. As far as they were domesticated and they listened to us, we were happy with it. But I'm not very sure if that would be. It's entirely my viewpoint, really. So if you look at literature, it has, for some reason or the other, animals have always been part of most of the literary texts, but the key point here, as you've noted down in the one of the last slides, is that they were anthropomorphized. So do they have an animal perspective? No, they had a human voice given to an animal. That is because we wanted to distance, this element of alienation in literature. I think that is the reason why these animals were given human voices. Animal Farm was such a big hit because if at all George Orwell had chosen to use human beings, real human beings, I don't think it would have made a big a difference, or it would have made a big splash, because he was able to use animals as part of that allegory. I think that's what clicked. So in literature, this sort of distancing or for alienation, I think using animals worked very well. Black Beauty, for example, the moment when literature and animal studies is mentioned, the first book that I read, which made me cry and which made such an impact on me, was Anna Sewell's Black Beauty. The sort of trauma that the animal undergoes, and probably one of those first books to be spoken entirely from a horse's perspective, where it's given an animal perspective. Maybe if it had voice, maybe it would have spoken like that. So literature has always included animals, and animals have traveled with literature from time immemorial. So what do these animals do, and what is the purpose of animal studying, or first of all, putting animal characters, purpose of studying these animals? So there is and literature is the last place you would look for to learn about animals. It's not like your biology, or it's not like your zoology, which has got a lot more descriptive, or a lot more it has a lot more scientific inputs to give about animals. Literature is not really the popular place to look for animals, but literature helps you to bring those animals closer to. They give you the cultural aspect, or the cultural aspect of living with animals. So to give you an example, cows, for example. So you have for example, Godan, Premchand's Godan. It's a book about caste. It's about, at the end, it is about a very different. It is a book about the hierarchies, social hierarchy. But at the central image of the novel is a cow. Not It's a metaphorical cow. And cow politics, and we are already aware of the cow politics. So culturally, what do these animals signify for us? And think that's where literary studies, or literature and animal studies helps us in looking at animals from a cultural perspective. So that is one thing that when we look at literature and animal studies, that is one thing that becomes evident to us. Now, the second one is, as I mentioned earlier, about looking at animals through this hierarchical lens. When we, especially in the wake of critical animal studies, someone did mention about critical animal studies. So critical animal studies works for a very political, vehement way of, to be politically active about animals, or what we do about animals. So from that perspective, I think today, in after 2000, when literature and animal studies emerged as a new field of study in humanities, I think there is a focus on the political and historiocultural nature of representation of animals in literature. So when Conrad writes about the animals in Heart of Darkness, the ivory trade, or when H.G. Wells writes about the vivisection in The Island of Moreau. So when we revisit all these novels, we look at how these animals are treated, which interestingly has also given rise to vegan studies. So there is a lot of movement all around the world, a vegan movement all over the world, and I think it has also given rise to that. Many people are working on that. There is a book called The Vegetarian. So it has given rise to sub-genres, or sub-theories of this sort. So today we look at it from a very political perspective, because and this is a consequence of the rise of human rights discourse. So much like how we have our own rights, animal rights activists profess that there is a voice. Animals can't speak, but we need to speak for them. Animals too are alive, because they have a central nervous system, and any animal or any living being with a central nervous system feels pain and emotion. We may not be aware of it, we are blind to it, but they are still they undergo suffering and pain. And there are a lot of experiments that are being done on mice and rats which suggest that they feel emotions just like how human beings. They laugh, they are happy, they express joy, they express sadness, they express anger. So yes, we do eat them. Yes, we need them for food, but the massive scale in which the food is prepared, the massive scale of slaughtering that happens, and I think that's what worries us. So if you and another reason that is given, especially by critical animal theorists, is that there is what is known as an absent referent. That is because we, especially the past past 20 years or 30 years, this generation, we have moved ourselves away from animals, right? We don't live with our farm animals. We have at the most a dog in the house, or at the most a parrot in the house. We don't have any other. We don't live in a farm. We don't see the animals. We have no clue about where the food comes from. So there was an experiment that was conducted among school children in UK, where the children were asked where their hamburger or their burgers were coming from, or their sausages were coming from. They had no clue. They were absolutely unaware of the fact that it comes from the meat of an animal. To make a hamburger, you have to chop and mash the pieces of a cow. So this is what is known as absent referent, because we are distanced from the source of the food. So it happens in a very mechanical, it's a very unhygienic conditions in which these animals are cruelly slaughtered and things like that. So today, animal studies mostly concerns itself with that. And in literature, I think there are more and more researchers and more critiques are looking at how animals have been treated in literature. Moby Dick's, I'm on the top of my head, I think of Moby Dick, Melville's Moby Dick, whale fishing. How and we have looked at it from a very very literary theorist angle, but if you look at it from the perspective of a critical animal studies theorist, I don't know, it's morbid to look at it, or something as simple as Albatross poem. So if you look at that poem, so somebody kills an albatross for no purpose at all. It brings a curse, but of course we get lost in it. But then a bird which shows so much of, which is very cozy and warm towards the silence, and suddenly that is killed. So throughout literature, today scholars have started looking into how they are represented, how this pain or how they have been treated in literature, and much like how we looked at feminist text as a feminist text, or much like how we looked at a eco-critical text. I think it's the same trend that is happening with literature and animal studies today. So there are quite a lot of works which have come out. The book that was mentioned earlier in the presentation, Mario Ortiz Robles, his work titled as Literature and Animal Studies, it's one of those pioneering books which has he as she had demonstrated in the presentation. There are a lot of poems that he had taken and analyzed about the tropes, animal tropes in literature, about the songbirds, about the dogs in literature, and the mythological animals in literature. So these are various ways in which animals or animal stories have been discussed through literature. So to conclude, it is a promising field because there is so much that can be analyzed from mythological stories through the course of the history of literature. Animals have been inseparable from the how poets had imagined. It had helped us to imagine a world. If you wanted to, raven, for example, I think of raven, all those birds and animals which have been used by the poets to talk about human world. But why exactly do we look at animals that way? Why did we why did we use animal that way? We relook at our perspectives. We take a different look at animals now. So we have to look it from the animal's perspective instead of the human perspective through these studies. And I think it's a very promising field. And I'm glad I had an opportunity to listen to those presentations. And I thank Dr. Maria Preeti Srinivasan for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Saranya ma'am, for your valuable keynotes. Next, I would request the reviewers to deliver the reviews about the session.
Thank you, Saranya, for that wonderful, what did the way of your presentation, incorporating both the introductory presentations of both the presenters today. And I think you included that critical animal studies, which they had failed to really dwell on. I think that's what is mostly done today. So many people are, I think so, especially in Australia, in America, you have plenty of people concentrating on that particular aspect. And that is what I think, as you said, Saranya, they're turning to, to be vegans, and but that too, I wonder whether that is also just the right kind of attitude. But there is always in the animal world, we learned, they say Bruce Lee and other people learned many moves, they say, from the animal world. We have so much to learn from them, especially the way they also limit, they eat only, they kill only to eat, unlike human beings who keep hoarding. And right, I think they're what do you call, they never get satisfied with what they get. Animals are in so much to learn from that world. I think that's what the earlier writers concentrated on, to show us what their nature is, but we fail to, I think, take it. And yet this killing, even today, ivory and other things are being, I don't know why people give a lot of importance to that. What makes them do all that? Huge mammoths are being killed for just ivory even today. So thank you for bringing that also. And Nisha and Sai, thank you for giving that, overall. I think this was what not many. I think both of you talked a lot on, after having given the introduction, on the tropes, animals being used as tropes. Thank you both.
Thank you, ma'am.
Saranya, this is Padma from Stella Maris College.
Yes, ma'am. Good evening, ma'am. I saw you.
Saranya, it was wonderful listening to you. Really enjoyed listening.
Oh, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot. Yes, ma'am.
Thought just came to me, especially in a country like India, I think animals are also very closely associated with power and caste. Since you did mention Godan and the cow politics, but there is also the association of certain animals with certain castes and power structures, which I think literature is bringing out, Dalit literature does bring out, and even I think more recent films like Mamanan and others, which use the pig and the dogs as bringing out. So perhaps that is also something that could be explored in a little greater detail. Might be
True, ma'am. Yeah, I'm also reminded of this Marathi film Fundry. Yeah, it also had a very similar trope. Yes,
so,
yes, ma'am. It is true. And also animals, as you said, Badi Vasala, I don't know, for some reason that comes to my mind.
Yes.
So not just, for caste, but even as a power.
Yes, exactly.
That, yeah.
And also even in a village setup, within a family, who has control over which animal?
Yes,
So that
yes.
also becomes an important thing. So power is also probably something we could bring into this. But wonderful talk, Saranya. I really
Yes, there
enjoyed it.
is so
Thank you.
much actually we can, although it's an upcoming field, I mean, it's a nascent field. And
Yeah.
when I searched online for material, there weren't many articles surprisingly, but there's so much of scope. I felt there is so much. I mean, especially from a very, from this critical angle, I think we can look at it. uh, but the question is that has always bothered me. I mean, this referent, I'm sorry, absent referent is a idea that was brought by Peter Salinger. He's Peter Salinger, right? Yeah. So he keeps talking. I mean, the reason why we don't respect animals is the source of our food is cut off. We don't know. We have no connection with farmers. We have no connection with farms. So I think that idea is something that has to be taken to every child, I suppose. So I don't know. It has always bothered me. I'm an animal lover. I do eat meat. Yes, I do that. I'm not a vegan myself, but I've always felt that we have given to. See, the immediately my mind says animal nature, but it shouldn't be that way. It is not animal. It was not animalistic nature. So it is this bias. I think we need to get rid of.
I
Thinking
think there's
that.
also a little bit about where a butcher shop is situated in a street in certain cities in
Mm.
India,
Mm.
and
It
where
is
it
again
would be
very caste.
situated.
I mean,
Yes,
like you
there is a
said,
lot of caste that comes
caste
in.
and
In
the
a village, it
society.
would be situated in a particular place. In a city, you would find it only in certain areas, and even what meat is sold in a butcher shop near my house, you wouldn't find a beef stall here. But if you go to North Madras, Raipur,
Yeah.
you would find a
Mm.
lot of beef stalls.
True.
So
True.
there's a lot that I think can be considered when we are looking at this the power and animals. Thank you so much,
Uh,
Saranya.
now to both Padma and Saranya, what do you think about domesticating animals, especially having pet animals in the house?
I don't know. I don't know. I love animals. I love dogs. I love cats, all sort of animals. But I don't know. Somehow from very young age, I've never really liked domesticating them, ma'am. I think a
Yes.
dog should have a dog's life is what I felt
Yes.
always felt. But I have nothing against people who keep their dogs. But I don't know. Somehow I feel that I know this is another interesting thing. How much of an animal is still left in those animals when we domesticate them? Their real instincts left in them. It's another question that has always interested me. Do they really stay as animals? I don't know. When I see these videos of lions behaving like dogs, I don't know. I don't know. Shouldn't they be more animal like? Is the thought that comes to my mind.
Srilata ma'am,
Yes.
we actually have a cat at home, but I think she owns us more than we own her. Uh, but the thing is also, I think it also depends on the kind of how they are in the house, because our cat usually uses our house as a she spends equal amount of time outside and inside the house. But what also we see is that a lot of people nearby who have dogs don't like their dogs to go out too much, which actually
Hmm.
you can see the dogs getting frustrated. But at the
Hmm.
same time, there is also this desire for exotic breeds of dogs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's another. I don't know whether that is Malays now with people.
It's scary. And
I
I
don't
know
know.
Maria
They
Preeti is a
breed
dog
them. They
lover,
breed them
so
and sell them and all that. That also is there.
Maria Preeti is a dog lover, so
I know.
I
I
can.
know. I was a little worried about that, but I just.
But interacting with animals, I think, makes you a very different person. We interact with a lot of stray animals on our street and on the
True.
nearby streets, and many animals just come to our house once in a week, open the gate on with their noses, and just come, bark twice and go away. They don't want food, they don't want anything. They just come, just say hi and go away. So it's I don't know. It's a wonderful feeling to actually be able to interact with animals. I very
That.
very few things come close to that.
True, true, very true, ma'am. I don't know. There is a crow that comes to my house every day. We feed them. They come exactly at the same. He come. I don't know if it's a he or a she, but come exactly at the same time. And as you said, I think we it makes us better. I do agree with you. Completely agree with you. I think being with
They have
animals.
all the urban crows and birds have, I think, they have adapted to urban ways because they are dependent, no, to drink from the tap, to take food from windowsills where we place them, or the bird feeders that we give. They adapt themselves. They even the nests are made of all kinds of exotic stuff today. So are we are I mean, does that tell us something more about animals and adapting, yeah, their techniques to the changing what do you call the scenario, like we do? We are going into the digital era. Maybe they will also learn
Ma'am, I think
because
there's already a little bit of, for instance, I think when I grew up, when I was a child, goats used to eat grass.
yes, now they
Now
they eat
they
all.
eat paper.
Yeah.
And I was told when I was young that, if you want to know whether a plant is poisonous or not, watch for
Yes.
goats eating them. If they
Mm.
eat them, it is okay. If they
Mm.
stay away from a particular kind of grass or plant, then that is toxic. But
No, but even fruits, no, we were
yes,
asked to watch if bats and others are
yes.
eating. Now we don't touch
We don't
anything that,
know. In
yeah,
fact,
that falls
bats
from
are
a tree.
coming out much
Yes.
earlier. They're coming out by 5:30
Yes.
nowadays, not really late in the
Yes.
night. So I think their patterns are also changing, and I think we need to be alert to those changes.
Yes.
I think we can also look into, a lot of the knowledge that we have or the perspectives that we have are inherited through religion and through scholarship that has preceded us, especially the and in terms of scholarship or knowledge, it's what the British people wrote, right? History of the world, history of the of of the natural world, and then about how, and also the species, how it is organized, and all the observations that they've made. So when both scientific and religious knowledge, they attribute to every creature certain attributes. So in religion, they would say pride. The peacock is proud. I mean, coming to think of it, it's ridiculous, right?
Yes.
And the snake is sly. Uh,
Yeah.
so much evil, like they use these creatures to symbolize evil. Then also like wolves in sheep's
Yes,
clothing.
yes, yes.
All these things, negative uh, attributes were foisted onto these innocent creatures. That's one thing. And somehow the human mind has always sought to establish some metaphors um, using uh, objects from the plant and animal world. As soft as a feather, there could be something softer than that. And, so I just feel that well, we keep through the ages, people keep recording their observations of the world, and we are continuing to do that, and we are also refuting what knowledge was handed down to us, the ideas that we received. Received, we are refuting received knowledge. So that will go on. It'll go on through animal studies.
That is true, ma'am. I think that is a part of animal studies. I mean, I think that's one of the most important aim of animal studies today, to rid of all this. Just like how you mentioned, proud peacock. Peacock never came and said it's proud of itself. Really, it's how. That's why I said it's human perspective. See, we assume things. Probably it's because we think, or we are sentient conscious beings, maybe. But as you said, a lot of false, not knowledge exactly, false ideas about these animals which have been foisted on to us. I
And
think
we
it.
also have the wolf stories, no? About
Yeah.
Romulus and Remus, the founders
Yes.
of
Yeah.
Rome.
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
were
Yeah.
raised by
That.
wolves.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mowgli.
No, no. This is Romulus,
I
ma'am.
know
Romulus
that's
and
right.
Remus
Even our Mowgli was raised by
by wolf.
wolves.
Yeah.
Yes.
so
Our
you have
Riverdale.
stories which have the human side of animals, like,
Hmm.
you know, like Saranya was saying, there are some people who cuddle lions and tigers, of course, the domesticated ones. There's also the story of this model named Waris. This story came out in Reader's Digest maybe some 20 or 30 years ago, maybe 30 years ago. She was a model in Somalia, and where they were practicing FGM, no, this female genital thing,
Mm, mm,
mutilation.
mm.
And so she had undergone that, and then she was betrothed to a very old man. Was a spirited girl, and she decided to run away from this. So there's this graphic description of her running and running, and over the sand dunes. So she goes up about, over the top of a sand dune, and when she's descending, she sees him at the top of the sand dune. But she makes it to Mogadishu, and there's a family. This is a real story. There's an ambassador to France, right? That Somalia's ambassador to France, and they are entitled to this take a person as a domestic maid. So anyhow, while running like through these sand dunes and all that, she she faints and falls unconscious. And there, when she opens her eyes, she is staring into the eyes of a lion, and she says that the creature didn't harm her; he just gently walked away. So, and then anyhow, she goes to France, and then she goes to take a picture for some official documents, and photographer notices that she has the makings of a model, and she becomes a famous model. So that incident is there where the lion doesn't devour her; he gently walks away.
Saranya ma'am, you're on mute. You're not audible. I guess you have to
Yeah,
unmute
yeah,
it.
yeah. Sorry, sorry. There was also a story. I mean, there was a documentary about a tiger racing a deer calf sometime back. It used to come. I mean, I think it's a National Geographic channel. I remember watching. For some reason, I don't know. It was very fond of this calf of a deer, and it was racing, and it didn't harm it, and they both were sleeping together, and it was such a nice thing. I think it happens in animal world, I suppose. I mean, maybe we have not understood them fully well is probably what.
But the thing over here, Saranya, is we can't essentialize. That's where
Yes,
you can't
that's true.
essentialize.
Say anything. Yeah.
And there was another documentary film about a leopard stalking a deer. And this deer was like it
Yeah.
was so young. I don't know if you've seen that. It's young, and it didn't realize the seriousness of it, and it was playful. So then this leopard gets interested in being friends. Okay, the leopard is suddenly confused about whether to be friends, play, tussle and roll in the grass together, whether to play roughly as friends, and or whether to devour this little one. And then the little one is trusting, and finally, somehow the leopard yields to the more brutal instinct and slays it. And then he takes the carcass up into the tree, and he doesn't eat it at all. He's confused. He's confused about it. It's very disturbing and very moving and very telling about relationships. The the complexities in these love
But
relationships.
these may be freaks, no?
Yes,
There
it
was
could
a
be.
story of some kind of wild animal like a cheetah or something which used to come every night and feed from a cow. In
Mm.
there was story like that. So they shot pictures also of it. Every night it comes, it drinks and milk and goes from the cow. So there are
That's what the way we
experiments
say.
are just these are just freaks of nature. But it's, maybe it is the, I mean, we do talk about, when we talk about the golden times to come, we talk about the lion lying down with the lamb.
Lamb and the
Yes,
lamb.
all that, and those will be the days. I mean, they say so. Maybe nature of, like human beings have been changing over times. Maybe animals also, nature of animals also will change. But what
I'm
we
actually
cannot understand is, when we are feeding, like agriculture, animals are also livestock and other kind of, which in large numbers. Sometimes they are killed off in, I mean, large numbers too. No, maybe it's for food, but uh, should we eat so much of chicken or so much? We wonder whether that aspect, no, that aspect of animal studies is, I think, very is still it is still a complicated thing, whether, I mean, human beings have to think about that aspect. It's
I think Miss Ranjini has something to say.
Yeah, I was about to say, I came across a book called Walking is a Way of Knowing in a Kada Forest, written by Madhuri Ramesh and three other people, Manish Chandi and Matthew Frame. It talks about how the organisms, living organisms in a life space, treat each other. It comes with a narrative from an indigenous uh, ancestor who talks about how each animal will not crisscross each other animals' trails. He says that's the law of the jungle. And he says that anybody entering the jungle coming from an urban eco-critical environment as a very conflicting thought or perspective over a forest or the living beings in a forest, that will tell us why the behavior of the animals differ in different environments particularly. So that will give us also a very broad idea of what happens when urban people move into the eco-critical environment and how they treat it and how they are being treated also. For example, he'll say that if certain people are going into the forest, the animals keep them unharmed because they live in that particular life space, and even the smell. They say the animal, if they smell the fragrance of the forest, then they keep it unharmed. As Preeti ma'am said, some stories in us, she was telling us that certain people had gone. These were very authentic stories. Maybe that might have also been the, that is also one of the perspective. So I thought I must share it. And there is also Jayamohan's uh, collection of stories, short stories that is recently published in English. Stories of the True, but he's already published Tamil work Yanai Doctor, which is now translated as Elephant Doctor. Will also talk about how the elephants in every bioregions, like in the forested areas, are expected to be treated and how they are very existential in nature to be treated. But then the urban eco-critical views and implementations of forest laws make their existence very conflicting over the contemporary period. So this will all talk about how animals are being treated in real life over every kind of environment, ecosystem, and urban and rural areas. So these are all are intersecting. So I thought of expressing the intersectionality of how an life space differs in every sphere of existence, whether it is in a very eco-critical perspective or urban perspective, something like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Uh, yes, you are right, because we are oblivious to the destruction. I would say destruction that we leave in our wake. We leave in the wake of our path towards so-called development, be it technological advancement. They say all the new mobile phones with 5G technology have already killed thousands of birds. The radio microwave that is used in these frequencies are harmful for birds, which is true. They have conducted an experiment, it's true, but we still go ahead with it. And elephants, as you said, yes, is definitely I think the mark of a healthy environment is the way in which animals behave. But I think I don't know, majority of us are not really, there are very few activists or environmental activists who are really real activists who are committed to this cause. And I would say we are all party to this destruction. If the
Yeah.
moment you take a book or the moment you use a mobile phone, we are all party to this. I'm not very sure really how they speak about sustainable living, but I'm not even sure if that is possible anymore. I think we've done enough damage to go back
Yeah.
to a pristine state. I'm not even sure if any sort of balance can be maintained with the sort of destruction that we are. See,
Yes.
development is fine, but not for it. It should be for
At the cost
me.
of life.
Yeah, not at the cost of our environments. If you don't have, you destroy lands and build offices. You have these IT companies. You destroy agricultural lands. You destroy forest lands and build highways. What are we planning to do? I mean, where do we get our food from? I don't know. These are things, and we'll go on search of other forests, unexplored lands, and we'll start destroying them. There are still groups of islands which have not caught the eyes of the human beings. Probably it will be some sort of a neo-colonization which will happen, which will where we will go and conquer. I don't know. I think it just goes on. Maybe I don't know. I have this very no. I don't know if it's a right view, but I think slowly we are on a very self-destructive path, and I don't know.
Yeah,
It's a
we
very
are already on. Because
self-designed or
they say the corals in the coastal areas in India, for example, in Tamil Nadu itself, in Thoothukudi, the colors of the corals are already lost, which shouldn't be. Then they say that it is the actual thermometer of all the destruction that is gonna come. And they are using corals and algae which are actually brought from Philippines. They are coming and cultivating it here to add it in soft drinks and all. So when we are actually engineering something artificial, it basically erodes the natural resources and also the characteristics that might be in the livelihood of all the living organisms. The portrayals that I've read as that's what I've understood from whatever narratives that I come across recently, the coral reefs
yeah,
and
of course, you can't see.
the
Somebody
graphic
they were
visual
mentioning about
effects also
introducing
became.
these breeds, new
Yeah.
breeds of animals. Uh, it can be very. See, for example, sometime back, years back, this something called Seema Karvelamar, which was brought for fodder for fuel. That became a parasitic species which killed the natural ecosystem of the place. They apparently, because people did not have enough fuel for their stove, they planted these trees to get these stems and wood for their stoves, and slowly it started destroying the lakes, it started destroying the land areas there. So this sort of introducing foreign species, even bringing these very exotic birds, exotic fish, exotic animals. There is a legal ban. There are legal systems in place where you can't bring, for example, you can't take seeds to US. But in spite of which, all these things do happen. I don't know. I think we are in a, as I said earlier, it's a very well-made self-destructive system. So where we lay the foundation for our own death, I suppose. I don't know.
We
I'm
are just so
earlier.
caught up in
I don't know. It's
industrial
very,
scientific
yeah.
paradigms these days.
Sorry.
We are so caught up in industrial scientific paradigms these days, where we look at very not very ornamental developmental paradigms. Rather, we are much focusing on the industrial paradigms, which will help on developing digital India. All these are creating many eco wars and also environmental depletions basically, which actually changes our lifestyle, seasons, and that affects almost all parts of the ecosystem and started eroding probably. Only few people are trying to like Lady Tarzan in Jharkhand, she tried to save a forest because they were trying, illegal mafias were trying to fell the trees, and she encouraged the village to save it. So that kind of initiative also brings a development, but at equally depleting it with this kind of paradigm shifts over the ecosystem.
Yes,
that
of
affects the
course. I
animal
think
world.
we are focusing more on industry-based paradigm. You're right. But agriculture is also a major polluter because we do let out a lot of carbon dioxide through that way. Agriculture in itself is also a polluter. I don't know how to find a balance. I hope at least the future generation has got. We are all the hope, I suppose. Future generation has some solution. I don't think it'll be a perfect solution, but along the way, if there is some way to sustain or at least pause it for a while. Maybe pause it. Maybe that
Yes,
would be.
encouraging wilderness is
Uh,
something that they suggest for that. But then, how far? Even
No,
that.
ma'am, even encouraging wilderness, you see, they say planting trees.
Mm.
They say planting trees will not do any, it won't be beneficial at all, it says.
No, it
Because,
has to be. I mean, it is very difficult to reconstruct the original
yes,
place because we
exactly.
have already destroyed, and today we have endangered. I mean, a whole lot of species that are exotic in our country. Okay, in our own the lantana. The I mean, lantana is I think native here. They what they call eupatorium. All these things are just common weeds in South India which are actually which were from Africa and other places. So whether it works with our ecosystem, we don't know. They have adapted beautifully into our ecosystem, but they have killed off so much of the natural thing. So it's like that. But so far, we have just like the Americans. I mean the Europeans introduced rats and what is that? And those sheep and other things and killed off the dodo in Mauritius, right in that island, like that dodo bird, like that. Many of the species will get extinct when others come in. So we can't even bring back wildernesses today. And as you said, agriculture was the first major, but because mono agriculture is monoculture. Monoculture is wrong. Diversity is good, they say. So encouraging wilderness is in one way better than what you call this thing. But then we won't have enough food. So what do we choose? If we don't have agriculture, we don't have enough food. So that's an eternal dilemma I think we'll be facing.
I think finally human species will be weeded out, ma'am. I think
Yes.
somehow nature will find a way to weed us out and there'll be a better species
Yeah,
in
we have
place.
so
I
many
think
books.
yeah, yeah. Not dystopian.
Disturb.
I've always felt, this is a very nice self-destructive inbuilt system that we have. Where we lay the path for our own destruction, I suppose. I don't want to sound any, disillusioned or anything, but I think that's how nature works. So it has
Yes.
a way of weeding out what it didn't want, what doesn't want. So it's
Yeah, the next ice age or whatever, like
might come
the
in.
yes, might
I
come in.
Ma'am, I think it's 7:43, ma'am. Preeti, ma'am, should we
Yes,
wind
it's
it
Yes,
up?
time.
yes,
Yes.
Shalini. Yeah. Thank you. We had a lovely discussion.
Yes, ma'am.
So
Thank you so much.
I wouldn't exhaust you more than this. So, Shalini, can you wind up with the vote of thanks?
Okay, ma'am. Thanks to all the reviewers for viewing this session with valuable discussions. Let me give the vote of thanks. Gratitude fills the air as we conclude this enlightening symposium on literature and animal studies. Thanks to Ms. O. Sai Shri ma'am for exploring animal tropes and Mrs. J. Nisha Daphne ma'am for delving into the language of the wild. And special thanks to Dr. J. Saranya ma'am for her insightful keynote. A special thanks to our head of the department, Dr. Maria Preeti ma'am, for her visionary leadership, and Dr. Vinita ma'am for her dedication and unwavering commitment to student growth. To all participants, faculties, guests, and your engagement made this event a success. Carry the gain knowledge forward as we continue exploring interdisciplinary literary studies. Thank you and have a wonderful evening. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank you,
you, ma'am.
Shalini.
Thank
You
you.
compared very
Thank you,
well.
ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Saranya,
Thank
for
you, ma'am.
making time
I
for
had a
us.
lovely time. Thank you so
Next
much.
theme. Next theme.
Nancy, next theme. What studies?
Crime
Crime,
studies.
crime. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Nancy, for taking care of everything behind the scenes. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye,
Bye,
Saranya.
Sridhar. Bye.
Bye.